People often describe a quiet sense of financial pressure that doesn't seem to come from a single source. There's no dramatic event, no sudden change, no clear reason they can point to. And yet, the feeling is there. A low-level tension. A background hum of concern. It can show up while scrolling on a phone, during casual conversations, or even in moments that should feel calm. What makes this feeling especially confusing is that it doesn't always match reality. On paper, nothing may be wrong. But emotionally, something feels unsettled. We often assume pressure comes from obvious causes. A deadline. A shortage. A visible problem that demands attention. When it doesn't, the mind starts searching for explanations. It feels natural to think, I must be missing something, or maybe I should be doing more. This is where financial pressure becomes less about circumstances and more about perception. The experience itself isn't imaginary, but its source is often psychological rather than practical. Human brains are prediction machines. They're constantly scanning for signals about safety, risk, and stability. Money, over time, has become deeply tied to these signals. Not because it's inherently emotional, but because it has been associated with security, freedom, and social standing across cultures. Even without conscious thought, the brain treats money as a proxy for future safety. So when the environment feels uncertain, money-related anxiety can surface even if nothing concrete has changed. One reason this pressure feels unclear is that it often comes from accumulation rather than a single trigger. Small cues stack on top of each other. A headline glimpsed in passing. A conversation overheard. A comparison made without intention. None of these moments are powerful on their own, but together they create a sense that something important is at stake. The brain doesn't always differentiate between direct threats and ambient signals. It responds to patterns. It's easy to believe that financial stress must be linked to actual financial trouble. But psychology suggests that stress is more closely tied to uncertainty than to outcomes. When the future feels predictable, even difficult situations can feel manageable. When the future feels unclear, even stable situations can feel tense. This helps explain why people sometimes feel pressure during periods that appear calm from the outside. Social context plays a major role here. Humans are deeply social creatures, and much of our understanding of how we're doing comes from observing others. Not through careful analysis, but through quick, intuitive comparisons. When those comparisons are constant, vague, and incomplete, they can distort perception. The mind fills in gaps, often assuming others are more certain, more prepared, or more secure. This doesn't require direct competition or envy. It can happen quietly. Someone mentions a plan in passing. A post shows a milestone without context. A trend becomes visible without explanation. The brain doesn't ask whether these moments are representative. It simply registers them as data points. Over time, these data points form an internal narrative about where one stands relative to an imagined norm. We might think that awareness would prevent this effect, but awareness doesn't always neutralize emotion. Even when we know that social information is incomplete, the emotional response can still occur. The feeling of pressure often arrives before the explanation. By the time logic catches up, the sensation has already settled in. Another contributor is the way modern environments compress time. Past, present, and future signals are blended together. Information about long-term possibilities appears next to daily routines. Potential outcomes are presented alongside ordinary moments. This makes it harder for the brain to separate what is immediate from what is distant. Financial pressure can emerge from this blending as the mind struggles to prioritize. When future possibilities feel close, they can feel urgent. Not because they are, but because they are visible. The brain is sensitive to visibility. What's seen often feels more important than what's merely possible. This can create a sense of pressure that isn't tied to action, but to awareness. Simply knowing about something can be enough to activate concern. There's also the role of identity. Over time, money becomes intertwined with how people see themselves. Not in a deliberate way, but through repeated associations. Responsibility, independence, competence. These qualities are often subtly linked to financial stability in cultural narratives. As a result, feeling uncertain about money can feel like uncertainty about the self. This is why financial pressure can feel personal, even when it's abstract. It's not just about resources, it's about what those resources symbolize. When those symbols feel threatened, even vaguely, the emotional response can be strong. The pressure isn't saying something is wrong, it's saying something important feels unclear. The brain also has a bias toward detecting potential loss more strongly than potential gain. This tendency evolved to prioritize survival. In modern contexts, it can mean that imagined negative outcomes carry more emotional weight than positive ones. Even when the likelihood is unknown, the possibility alone can be enough to create tension. This doesn't require catastrophic thinking. Often, it's subtle. A sense that one might regret something later. A feeling that inaction could have consequences. These thoughts don't need to be fully formed to influence emotion. They operate in the background, shaping mood rather than conscious belief. Another layer comes from the way financial topics are discussed socially. Money is often treated as something people should have figured out. This creates an unspoken standard. When experiences don't align with that imagined standard, pressure can arise. Not because of failure, but because of perceived deviation from a norm that was never clearly defined. Silence plays a role here too. Many people don't openly discuss uncertainty or confusion around money. As a result, those feelings can seem isolated. When everyone else appears confident, uncertainty feels like a personal issue rather than a shared one. The pressure intensifies not because of the feeling itself, but because of the belief that it's uncommon. We might assume that clarity would resolve this pressure, that once information is available, the feeling would fade. But psychology suggests that more information doesn't always lead to more calm. In some cases, it increases complexity. Each new piece of information introduces another variable, another possibility, another comparison. The mind becomes busy rather than settled. This is especially true when information lacks context. Facts without framing can feel overwhelming. They float without grounding. The brain struggles to integrate them into a coherent picture. The result isn't understanding, but noise. And noise can create pressure simply by demanding attention. There's also the emotional residue of past experiences. Even when circumstances change, emotional patterns can linger. If someone has experienced instability before, the nervous system may remain sensitive to signs of uncertainty. This doesn't mean they expect the same outcome. It means their system has learned to stay alert. This learned alertness can activate without conscious awareness. A small cue can trigger a familiar response. The pressure feels present, but the reason feels absent. From the inside, it can feel confusing. From a psychological perspective, it's a pattern doing what it was designed to do: protect against perceived risk. Cultural narratives amplify this effect. Stories about success, preparedness, and foresight are often highlighted. Stories about ambiguity, pause, or neutrality are less visible. Over time, this creates an impression that constant progress and certainty are normal. When real life doesn't match that impression, pressure fills the gap. It's important to note that none of this requires irrationality. These responses are deeply human. They arise from systems that evolved to navigate complex environments. The challenge is that modern financial environments are abstract, symbolic, and constantly shifting. The same systems that once responded to immediate threats now respond to ideas, projections, and social signals. This helps explain why financial pressure can feel continuous rather than situational. It's not reacting to a single event. It's responding to a stream. A steady flow of signals that never fully resolve. The mind doesn't get a clear all clear, so it stays slightly activated. There's also the role of ambiguity tolerance. People vary in how comfortable they are with uncertainty. For some, ambiguity feels neutral. For others, it feels uncomfortable. This isn't a choice. It's a trait shaped by temperament and experience. When ambiguity intersects with money, the discomfort can be interpreted as pressure. This interpretation happens quickly. Sensation comes first. Explanation follows. We feel uneasy, then ask why. If no clear answer appears, the feeling can persist. The mind may even create explanations after the fact, attaching the pressure to whatever seems plausible at the moment. The absence of a clear reason doesn't make the experience less real. In some ways, it makes it more difficult to process. Problems with clear causes can be addressed mentally. Ambiguous feelings resist closure. They linger, asking for attention without offering resolution. Over time, this can lead to hypervigilance. Not constant anxiety, but a low-grade watchfulness, a sense that something should be monitored. This state consumes mental energy. It can make ordinary moments feel slightly tense, even when nothing specific is wrong. It's worth reflecting on how often financial pressure is described in emotional terms rather than practical ones. Words like heavy, tight, or stressful point to bodily sensations as much as thoughts. This suggests that the experience lives as much in the nervous system as in the intellect. The nervous system responds to perceived instability by preparing for action. When action isn't clearly defined, the preparation remains unused. This can feel like restlessness or unease. The body is ready, but the mind doesn't know what for. The pressure is the mismatch. Modern life doesn't offer many moments of resolution. News cycles continue. Trends evolve. Conversations shift. There's rarely a clear endpoint where the brain can relax and say, "That's settled." Without closure, activation becomes the default. Financial pressure becomes a background condition rather than a response. We might think that removing attention from money would remove the pressure, but attention isn't entirely voluntary. Salient topics draw focus automatically. When money is framed as central to safety, identity, and future possibility, it naturally attracts attention. The pressure follows the attention, not the other way around. Another subtle factor is responsibility perception. Feeling responsible for future outcomes, even abstract ones, can create pressure. This responsibility doesn't need to be defined. The mere sense that choices matter can be enough. When outcomes feel important but unclear, pressure fills the space between intention and knowledge. This can be especially strong in environments that emphasize individual agency. When people believe outcomes reflect personal decisions, uncertainty can feel like potential error. The pressure isn't about what's happening now, but about what might be judged later, even by oneself. At the same time, collective uncertainty can amplify individual pressure. When many people are unsure, the atmosphere itself changes. Conversations carry tension. Media tone shifts. Even without direct involvement, individuals absorb the mood. The pressure becomes ambient, shared, and harder to trace. It's easy to underestimate how much mood is shaped by environment. Emotional states are contagious, not in a dramatic sense, but in subtle ways. Being surrounded by concern can create concern. Financial pressure doesn't always originate inside the individual. Sometimes it's picked up from the air. All of this points to an important insight. Feeling financial pressure without clear reasons doesn't mean something is wrong. It means the mind is responding to a complex web of signals. Some internal, some external, some present, some anticipated. The experience is real, even if the cause is diffuse. Understanding this can change how the feeling is interpreted. Instead of searching for a single explanation, it becomes possible to see the pressure as an emergent property of modern life, a byproduct of visibility, comparison, uncertainty, and meaning. This perspective doesn't remove the feeling, but it can soften its edges. When pressure is understood as a response rather than a verdict, it loses some of its authority. It becomes information, not instruction, a signal to be observed rather than obeyed. As we reflect on this, it's worth remembering that humans didn't evolve in environments filled with abstract futures and constant comparison. The systems we rely on are doing their best to adapt. Financial pressure, in this light, isn't a personal failure. It's a human response to complexity. The goal of understanding money psychology isn't to eliminate emotion. It's to recognize it, to notice how feelings arise, what they're responding to, and how they shape perception. Awareness doesn't demand action. It invites curiosity. When financial pressure appears without clear reasons, it can be tempting to assume it's pointing towards something urgent. But often, it's pointing towards something understandable. A mind navigating uncertainty. A nervous system responding to signals. A person living in a world where money carries more meaning than numbers. Recognizing this can create space, not to fix, optimize, or correct, but simply to observe. And sometimes, observation alone changes the experience. The pressure doesn't disappear, but it becomes less mysterious, less personal, less absolute. In the end, financial pressure without clear reasons tells a story about how deeply money is woven into modern psychology. It reflects how perception, emotion, and environment interact. And it reminds us that many of our internal experiences are shaped not by individual choices, but by shared human tendencies. Understanding those tendencies doesn't promise certainty or relief, but it does offer context. And context can be grounding. It allows the experience to be seen as part of a larger pattern rather than a private problem. In that sense, clarity doesn't come from answers, but from understanding the question differently.